Hello, Adam.
Hello, Kat. Hello again. It's been a while.
It has been a while, and how are you?
I am very well, like everyone, in enjoying this sort of strange time and trying to just, day by day.
Yeah. It is a strange time, and it continues to be a strange time. I'm going to wait because I'm not sure if we are online yet, so I'm going to wait and see if all the technology is working and if people are with us. And if you are, if you could give us a like and a little sign of life, this would be great, so we don't feel lonely.
All alone, having a conversation.
Which is also great
Yeah.
because it's always a pleasure to talk with you, Adam. So yeah, life during these COVID times is a challenge. It must be, continuing as a yoga teacher, and I know that a lot of people here are teachers, so you've had to change life up a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not teaching in studios anymore. I teach for Movement for Modern Life, and I teach out of my living room, and I, write
Yeah.
blogs for you, and it's a whole new world,
Mm.
or just interesting world for the time being.
Mm.
But it's the world that got me thinking about the classes that I last filmed in these 6 classes on the Paramitas, which we'll get to.
Mm.
It sort of gave me time to reflect, so I am thankful for that time. Like, I have been able to read a lot. I've been able to think a lot, reflect. Sometimes that reflection is a bit too much, but it leads to good self-inquiry and like honest conversations with myself. So it's been good to have this time, but also it's challenging. Same for everybody.
Yeah, interesting though, and I'm very grateful that you've had the time to have the in-depth thoughts on it, and I could really tell that from the blog, which I've been really enjoying reading your blogs on Buddhism, and it's lovely. It's lovely to hear and see the sort of depth of thought that's going in, which I suppose if we were all running around town, which we're not doing anymore, it would be a
Yeah,
little bit different.
yeah, it's good to have this just like forced pause and forced
Mm.
stop. At least for the time being, it has had. I mean, of course, lots of terrible things, but it has had the benefit of giving reflective time
Mm.
and to take a step sort of out of momentum of what we've been doing,
Yeah.
and see, like, okay, is that still the path, or is there something I need to shift or change? So there are positives to everything, and actually, like, only in times of crisis and upheaval do we have spiritual growth.
Nice. I like that. And this is a good time of crisis and upheaval for us all.
Yes.
So, and it's a very good time to be reflecting in Buddhism. There could be
Yeah,
time.
it's funny. Well, because I feel a little bit. This is a vulnerable thing for me, because this is what has been underneath my practice and teaching. But like full disclosure, I am not a teacher of Buddhism.
Right?
I am a practitioner to an extent, although I'm not a Buddhist.
Mm-hmm.
But this is what fuels my practice,
Mm.
and has been the undercurrent in a lot of my classes for a long time. And for the most recent series of classes, which is in
Mm.
this course, it's like it's there, it's out front. So that was a big step for
Mm.
me, to put it
Mm.
out there,
No.
but put it out, from my perspective. So it's sort of like how these teachings have inspired my practice. So I wanted to share that.
Yeah, well, that's perfect, and that's as good as it gets. I mean, that's the whole point of being a yoga teacher, is you're teaching your interpretation of the practice. So that's brilliant. Now to just sort of move through and start for us all to think about yoga and Buddhism, because I must say I've always wondered, because lots of the aspects of Buddhism have very much appealed to me, and I have practiced, and also yoga. And I was never able to kind of put my finger on how is it that these two are related. So
Sure.
What is the relationship between yoga and Buddhism?
Okay, thanks for this. Always I get the simple questions.
Yeah, it's such a simple one.
Okay, well, I just want to. So I've said I'm not a teacher of Buddhism, so this is all coming from my perspective and my limited knowledge. But I think we can get a framework and see how that is relevant and applicable to our yoga asana practice.
Yeah.
But I was reading today, and a quote that I think puts this all in perspective, or gives us a good perspective, is from the Rigveda, which is an ancient Sanskrit text before anything resembling Buddhism and or yoga. So the quote is that truth is one.
Yeah.
The wise call it by different names. So truth is one. The wise call it by different names. So there are many paths. Okay.
Many paths to the truth.
Yes, there are many paths. There are many names of the truth. There are many ways to get there. So for me, the path has been from the Buddhist perspective, but I don't want to like present that and say that I think that's better than another perspective, or so I want us to see, like, especially if you hold other truths that that are important to you, that we see all this in perspective, that there are many paths to truth and many paths to awakening, and ultimately you just have to find the one where the language and the structure of it makes sense to you, and you have a personal connection. So anyway, I wanted to lay that out there.
Yeah, I like that. So there are many paths to truth. Yoga and Buddhism, and probably any kind of religion.
Yeah, and so if we're going to talk about yoga and Buddhism, we want to sort of like know what their relationship is, but also what they are independently. And I talked in, I think, the last one of these talks about what yoga is. And yoga, it's a lot of things, but let's just say it's mind-body unification practices that exist across a lot of different spiritual and philosophical disciplines and a lot of different cultures. So mind-body unification practices. So it might be meditation, it might be chanting, it might be the practice of postures, it might be service. It's a lot of things for a lot of different religions, spiritual traditions, and so on. So that is yoga, and that exists across a lot. Buddhism is also similarly not one thing. You have to think that, okay, we have 2,500 years of Buddhism,
right,
across South Asia, so like Indian subcontinent, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and then most recently how it's been sort of reinterpreted as it moved from basically Tibet through those political upheavals and occupation and all of that, to moving through the UK and the US with the teachers who were exiled from Tibet, and how it was reinterpreted in the 1960s especially. So like Buddhism is a lot of things. And even within Buddhism, there are different like subsets of it, which let's not get into all of that. But there's like Theravada, and there's Mahayana, there's Vajrayana, which is sort of tantric, and within those there are subdivisions. And sort of we have all the things that you might think of, like of meditation, and you have chanting, and you have ritual practices, but you also have like metaphysics, you have Buddhist psychology. So there's a lot to dig into. Okay. So there's a lot.
Feeling a little overwhelmed here.
Yeah, but then you find what practices work for you, and So we won't get lost in the weeds. But the question is like, all right, I'm a yoga practitioner. I even on like the last course, I got introduced to the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. I maybe read the Bhagavad Gita a little bit, or I've been reading the Upanishads and other things that mention yoga in different contexts. And so we have that perspective. of what yoga is. It's related to those texts, some of which relate to Hinduism, some of it's a little bit different. And what I want people to understand is there's actually a lot more, and that the history of yoga relates to a lot of other traditions, and all these things were developing simultaneously in India.
Right.
So we have things that predate Hinduism and Buddhism,
right,
that influence the development of Buddhism, Hinduism, yoga, and on and on. And there was a lot of cross-pollination of ideas.
Okay. So that makes sense.
Yeah. So you like a lot of things that if you look at yogic texts, they seem very like familiar if you're familiar with Buddhist texts, or if you read Buddhist texts, you think, oh, that these lists, some of them are sort of similar, and that, yes, they're actually pretty similar. And then the question might be, okay, well, I do postures. Doesn't that relate to the Hatha yoga tradition, which has nothing to do with Buddhism? And that is also there's more to the story.
Right.
And some of if we're looking at, we can look at like 20th century Hatha or sort of modern postural yoga, or we can look at the Hatha yoga that was developed much earlier. All right, so we'll look at those separately. So let's say we were looking at the Hatha yoga developed before the 20th century, which has its own series of texts, which are not Buddhist, okay?
Right.
But you can also find Buddhist texts, that some of which are earlier, which are playing with the same ideas of energetic locks in the body, of making shapes, of directing energy through the body, simultaneous to other texts that we're more familiar with doing the same things. All right, so it's all happening simultaneously, and there's a great tradition of Tibetan yoga. Okay, so it's all there. And then if we're looking at 20th century yoga, so much of the yoga we're familiar with came out of India at the beginning of the 20th century, with the teachers of Iyengar and Patabi Joyce, and all that sort of came before, and overlaid on top of the Hatha yoga they were doing, the practice of postures, was the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali.
Right.
So that was sort of a new hybrid of a practice with a spiritual tradition, or a text, the practice of postures with a text.
Right. Interesting.
And then so now we have, but also in the 20th century, we have teachers who have done the same thing with Buddhist philosophy and the practice of yoga postures. So all that has happened in the 20th century has happened 500, 600 years ago, 1,000 years ago. It's like, it's all happening. And I don't want to get into this game of like, who did what first, or what's the authentic. That's
a really common question. People get down that rabbit hole a lot, don't they?
Yeah,
of yoga.
And that's about fundamentalism and nationalism.
Right.
Okay, it's not about like trying to help people deal with their suffering. That's another weird thing. That's for another podcast. But I just want people to understand that like it's all a big stew, and we're lucky to have these teachings. And I don't really care who did what first. I just want to see like, okay, it's legitimate to play around with Buddhist ideas and yoga postures, because that's been happening for 1,000 years.
Yes.
As it has mixing up Patanjali with yoga postures, and using the other, all the great texts from other traditions that come together and give us all this we can play with to understand our bodies, understand our heart, and sort of deal with our suffering. And so that to me is exciting. And like, not everyone's going to resonate with Buddhist teachings. Not everyone's going to resonate with Patanjali or the Bhagavad Gita. And you find your path to the truth.
Oh, the truth. I like that. So when we think about the Buddhism, by the way, I just want to say a quick hello to people because we're joined by a few friends, and it's lovely that there are folks. I mean, it's always lovely to speak to you, Adam, of course, but it's nice also to be joined by people. So hello to Nina, hi to Kate, and Rocky. I like that. Being a yoga teacher requires moving a lot of furniture around right now. You're right. Faye, hi Sandy, and thank you for the links to the blogs. And hello Heidi, it's great to have you back, and Ursi as well. So really lovely to have you guys. And as we talk, I know that there's a lot of questions, and hello to Jenny. There's a lot of questions that come up for me as well. So as I think of questions, I'd love you guys also to ask questions as well. Oh, Emma, you found us. I'm glad. I'm sorry. Sorry that we went to another location. Technology is a bit weird sometimes. And I like, yes, Kate, it's about dealing with our suffering. And that's right. It's like, let's find compassionate ways in which we can live and be less worried about being imperfect in a way. I mean, Adam, which aspects of Buddhism do you think that you're particularly drawn to?
It's one of those things. It's hard to pin down like what attracts you to a spiritual teaching, but the teachings of Buddhism like have fascinated me since I was a teenager, and I studied at NYU and New York University, and I took courses on Eastern philosophy, and it sort of even predated me being very serious about yoga practice. But what I think it was for me was, and this may sound a little grim, but like the starting point was acknowledging suffering, saying like, that's real. Like, yes, it's like people are depressed.
Yeah.
And like, that's all right. It's all right. Like a lot of people are unhappy. A lot of people are suffering. It's all right. That's the truth. It's not like you don't have to put a smile on that and fake it. Like that is the truth. So that like in one of the major teachings of Buddhism, the Four Noble Truths, first of which being like the truth of suffering.
Yeah.
So that that starting point was comforting to me to see like, okay, I don't have to fake it. Like we're not all pretending we're happy. It's like we all acknowledge that we want to be happy, but there's a lot getting in the way. But what's really practical about Buddhism is that we acknowledge the truth of suffering, but we also, the second noble truth is we say like suffering has its causes. And the philosophy of Buddhism and the psychology and all the teachings get very sophisticated analysis of all the suffering, all the causes, all the things you can dig into and work with in your practice, in your body, in your life, in your relationships. So that appealed to me. It's like, okay, well, I can work on this, and that leads to the third noble truth is like there's a way out. There is an end to suffering. That, and I always think about this like whenever I'm personally suffering with something, and if suffering is like, if that seems like a big scary thing, you can just think like anxiety or a little bit upset, or you get annoyed, or it's just something that causes you a bit of trouble and don't want to do it. Like that's all suffering. It doesn't have to be like the biggest thing, but to see that, okay, I don't have to live with this.
Yeah.
Like there's a path out of this. So the last, the fourth noble truth is there's a path to end suffering. There's something you can do.
Yeah. And
it wasn't, the teachings aren't like someone's going to come save you, which I know is a lot of other traditions. And that my perception of other traditions is that an outside force will solve the problems. It's down to you. And that appealed to me.
Yeah.
That like, I got to do the work. Okay. I'm down with that. I'll do the work. But if I have a little bit of a plan, good attitude about it, I'll do the work. So that, all of that teaching just really appealed to me. And that was sort of bubbling along as I was starting my practice of yoga postures and studying. And, I found Meditation Center in New York, which really appealed to me. And then sort of around the same time, I started studying at Om Yoga in New York City, which was at that time led by Cindy Lee, who was teaching Buddhist thought as relevant to yoga asana. So that's really just been the way I have learned yoga long before. I mean, it took me years before I touched the Yoga Sutras. I mean, I was studying Buddhist thought and books and practice, long before. Not until I did a yoga teacher training did I read anything else.
Wow. Well, you're lucky. That was a great introduction to yoga for you.
Yeah, definitely.
That's amazing, because I know for me, I was first interested in Buddhism, and I was also interested in yoga, but I didn't have the correlation for ages. So yeah, I think that's really cool that your teacher, well, I mean, Cindy Lee as a teacher is a pretty marvelous way to start. Yeah, it's really cool. Lisa, I'm really glad you found us. I'm sorry, technology sent us onto another link in another planet, but in an alternative universe, we are now here, and I'm really glad that you found us. And I'm really glad that this is exactly the discussion you've been looking for, Erzi. We will continue. And I like this. Distancing from the ego of the voice we think is ours, but maybe isn't, is often a source of suffering. Getting distance from the ego or emotions through meditation has been helpful for me. Yeah.
So good. And that makes me think of like another thing that appealed to me about the teachings, or let's say the Dharma, because that's what it is. It's the path. It's the truth. Yeah. Is that if I go into the text and believe in it and work with it, I believe that my fundamental nature is good, that I have Buddha nature, that everything is fantastic and beautiful and blissful and joyful underneath, and what causes suffering is everything overlaid on top of it.
Yes.
That is sort of the image usually presented is like the sun is always there, but maybe there are clouds in the sky. But it's always it's always beautiful sky. It's there. It might just be covered up. And similarly, we always have Buddha nature. We're always fundamentally good, but there may be things temporarily getting in the way.
Yeah.
So I like that the starting point, the starting point was like acknowledging suffering, but also saying that, but we have Buddha nature.
Yeah.
And we're not sinful. We're not starting with sin. We're not starting with wrong. Because I grew up in, at least I'll say my perception of how I grew up in church and spiritual tradition was who I was a sin. And that was, I'll say that's my perception, because it gets far more complicated than that. But that was my perception, my takeaway from what was taught to me in the church was what I was a sin. So to start in a different way and say what I was perfect, and having Buddha nature, and maybe there are other things on top of that that's causing me suffering, but I can work on it.
Yeah.
That little shift was important for me. Is important for me.
It's big, and I absolutely agree, because I've always been somebody who's been interested in some kind of development. And yes, Emma says yes, that was her takeaway as well. So that's resonating, and it is for me, because I had always sort of seen the kind of self-improvement stuff. But the wonderful thing about Buddhism is there is no self-improvement project. It's sort of the opposite.
It's revelation, self-revelation.
Yeah, it's self-revelation. I like that. And it's interesting because, for example, when we're looking at your latest series of classes, there are a whole series of qualities which we are to cultivate, because they're good qualities in a person. But it's also interesting that beneath them all isn't that we're going to now be a better person and cultivate these qualities. So can you talk about what inspired you? What was it that you were thinking when you came up with the latest series, Uncovering Buddha Nature?
So just to give you the behind the scenes info,
Yeah.
we filmed these in I guess it was June.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't been out of my house or like my neighborhood really for about 3 months. I hadn't done anything but gone to the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the state I was in, which was feeling a little vulnerable and confused about career and life. And in
Mm-hmm.
this time, as I said before, it was a time to be reflective.
Mm-hmm.
So I went back and I said, all right, I'm gonna look back at some of the texts and revisit some things and explore new ideas in Buddhist philosophy, which I try to do yearly anyway.
Yeah.
But I went back. I decided to look back at the Paramitas.
Yeah.
And the books I had on the subject, and sort of the lectures I had attended, and notes, and sort of go through all this.
Yeah.
And I found it particularly helpful for me during this time period,
Yeah.
and it started influencing the classes I was teaching weekly. And so I decided to develop that content for the filming. And just to give you a perspective of what the Paramitas are, like we have to, like, if you're familiar with a lot of the Indian spiritual traditions, you will know they are filled with lists, endless lists upon lists with little subdivided lists and groupings inside, because it is an oral tradition, so
Mm-hmm.
lists helped it
Right.
get taught and spread.
Remember.
So list upon list. So one of the lists is the Paramitas. There are other lists like the Four Noble Truths, I said, like the Three Jewels, which is the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, which is like the Buddha, the Dharma, which is the teaching, the Sangha, which is the community. There's the Mimi's course, so it's on the Brahma Viharas, so it's the four of those, which she can tell you about, I guess, next week. And there are tons of other lists. But one of the lists is the Paramitas.
Mm-hmm.
And this comes from the Mahayana tradition of Buddhism, which you can look up if you're interested. But it's a list of 6 things.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's 4 things. Sometimes it's 10 things. Sometimes it's 52 things. Sometimes the 6 things have lists upon lists. So it's a lot. So it's a lot to play with, which is fun. So you can really dig in and lots of different translations. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, but there's just so much to talk about. So the Paramitas it's essentially bodhisattva training, and a bodhisattva is a sentient being who is awakened or is on the path of awakening or wants to be awakened, but is doing it not just for themselves, it's doing it for everybody else, for society, for a more enlightened society, sometimes even deferring their own enlightenment, their own ascension to nirvana to help other people.
Right.
So it's a path that really appeals to me because it's not just about my own individual liberation.
Yeah.
It's about taking everybody else along for the ride.
Yeah.
Which I think is
Like
particularly important. But I also think that making the connections with other people help me.
Yeah.
So it's like it goes back and forth. So the Paramitas are bodhisattva training. There's 6 qualities. There's 6, sometimes called 6 perfections. It's sort of like things to work on. It's sort of the training that you would do if you want to be an awakened being for yourself and for other people.
Now let's roll back. An awakened being. What do you mean by that, Adam?
Oh God, if I knew, then I
I know, right?
So let's just say free of suffering.
Right.
Free of attachment. Free of what makes life difficult.
Wow.
So and that if you're free of those things, then you get to live in sort of the joy and bliss of the world.
Wow.
So an awakened being, it's it may take us a long time to get there.
Yes.
And in these teachings, it depends on how traditional you get about it. Maybe it takes lifetimes upon lifetimes, but we're seeking a taste of it.
Nice.
So the 6 paramitas are generosity,
Yep.
discipline, patience, enthusiasm or exertion,
Mhm.
meditation, and prajna, which is a form of wisdom, which is sort of like a higher form of wisdom. All
Mhm.
right. So generosity, discipline, patience, enthusiasm, meditation,
Mm.
prajna. The way I learned to remember them.
Mhm.
Okay. This is the funny way to remember them.
Yeah.
Gosh darn it, please eat my pizza.
Said nobody ever.
Yeah. Gosh darn it, please eat my pizza. But that actually, a very generous person might say that. Gosh darn it, please eat my pizza.
I like that.
All right, so that's the silly way you can remember what they are.
Mm.
But there's just so much within them to work on,
Mm.
and I could work my whole life on one of them.
Yeah.
But the 6 have given me so much to think about in my life, in my body, in my practice, in my mind.
Mhm.
I wanted to share.
Yeah, absolutely. And which ones are you currently working with, or is that too personal?
Oh, no, it's fine. I've been working a lot with enthusiasm.
Oh, that's a good one. Now you come across as a very, very enthusiastic person.
Well, the enthusiasm really matters. It's about enthusiasm for your practice.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the ability to keep up with your practice and
Right.
do the work no matter what. If it's now dark outside, when
Mm-hmm.
you wake up, do you still do your practice? Or do you say, I just would rather have my bowl of granola and
Mm.
watch television because I'm tired? And not to speak from personal experience,
Of course.
it's like what do you use? What
Mhm.
fuel? Like where's the petrol tank that's going to get
Mhm.
you, or like the electric car plug-in that's going
Mm.
to get you pumped up to do the work of your practice, which
Mhm.
gives you benefit, because it takes a lot of work to
Yeah.
deal with every little bit of suffering and attachment and negative
Mm.
thought and whatever you do that causes
Mm.
you grief, to work on that day after day. It's a lot of work. So the point is like, well, how do I get the energy?
Yeah, right.
So that's what I'm working on. I
Yeah.
try to think of like, oh, what in the morning now, especially
Mm.
that it's darker out, like what
Mm.
will get me going?
Mm.
That is a thought that I'm
And
working on.
that's so interesting. I love that because also it relates to discipline, and discipline is also, I always think of tapas as well, because a practice is a practice, is something that we have to do every day, or we have to do regularly, otherwise it's not a practice, and these things are hard work. But it's interesting to me particularly that it is the enthusiasm that is firing your daily cold morning, dark morning practice rather than discipline. That seems a lot more positive and a lot more sort of doable.
Yeah, and so I'll say 2 things to that is that all of the paramitas, they work together.
Right.
So there's a lot of overlap. So of course there will be discipline involved with me trying to do my practice in the morning, but
Mhm.
to still to keep up with that discipline, you will
Yeah.
have to enthusiasm. So they work together. And the important thing is that 5 of them are like things you do.
Yeah.
So generosity, discipline, patience, exertion, meditation, like there are things that you do or qualities that you try to cultivate.
Yeah.
The prajna, the wisdom, is the mindset of
Right.
all of them. That all of this you do to decrease your suffering and decrease the suffering of others. So do
Mhm.
I go back to this example of discipline, or
Mhm.
or trying to just do my practice every day?
Mm.
I could be doing my practice every day because I think I have to have the discipline. I'm going to do it no matter what, and I'm just going to tell everyone about it. If other people aren't doing it, they're weak and lazy. If I'm not doing it, I'm weak and lazy.
Right.
And if I can't do it, then I'm going to be really annoyed. And
Yeah.
it could be this thing that trying to have the discipline causes you suffering and causes you stress and causes
Good
problems.
point. Good point. And that's the sort of self-improvement mindset as well with discipline.
So then a paramita of discipline, or paramita of enthusiasm, will be doing this to decrease suffering, and keeping an eye out for when it can creep into this thing that you get attached to, or to say that you're better than someone else, or whatever it is, because that gets in there. So one of my teachers refers to the prajna paramita, so this sort of wisdom, as a BS detector. So it busts you. So it's that fundamental attitude is important. And also, like you brought up tapas, and that's where I find my perspective and the way I practice on it, it might be slightly different than someone else, because this is again just my perception of there's subtleties to all of this.
Yeah.
But you might have the perspective that I do my yoga practice as a form of tapas to generate heat and like burn off bad things, and it's like this sort of thing you have to do, and it's just like this fiery thing. And to me, I find that is a little extreme. And that's so I want to find the middle ground where I see I can do things. This is to really push myself, but do I have to go that far? What is that about? Am I just doing that because I have this sort of negative image of myself and I need to like self-improve? Do I need to fix what I think is bad karma or whatever it is? Or am I finding this middle ground? But that, again, is my perspective.
Well, I like that. And I like the fact of harnessing the same, I suppose I'll put it in quotes, results, but through the raw enthusiasm, or I like this comment, where do you find the energy? It's like, it's an energy for it. It is that. It is a feeling, I suppose, of vibrance and garnering it in an intentional way, not being just like, I don't have the energy. Because I think in our society, a lot of us are like, no, I'm not a very energetic person. And then you go back onto the sofa. But,
so let's take this energy question back. I think it's really good. And put it in the perspective of the prajna paramita. So it's the wisdom paramita. And I was trying to think of like how you can get it. I know this sounds like a little highfalutin to say like transcendent wisdom, or I've heard wisdom beyond wisdom. And the fact is a little highfalutin that we're not really translating it. We're just calling it prajna. So I was thinking like saying prajna is wisdom is like thinking like referring to Mozart as a guy who wrote some songs on the piano.
Okay.
That doesn't quite get it. Okay, there's a lot more. Anyway, that's a tangent. So you can think about that. So if we want the energy, if we want to do the things that are good for us, I think we fundamentally have to believe that we're worth it. That we start from a place of I am good. I am worth it. I should not suffer. Other beings should not suffer. And if we start from that positive place, I think it's more likely we can summon the daily energy to do the practice, rather than starting from a point of I am flawed, my body is deficient, my mind is deficient, whatever, or I am I am a sin, I am this, I am that, I'm ashamed, I am guilty. This, it's like, no, I am good. Maybe I've made some bad choices. Maybe I've done some things. Maybe I need to work on my temper. Maybe I need to work on this, but I am good. And when we start from that, which is how I started the class on wisdom, the class on the prajna paramita, is that I am good. I am good. I should not suffer. Other beings should not suffer. I believe that. I'm going to connect to my humanness. I'm going to connect to my vulnerability. I'm going to connect to the thing that connects me to all other people. And I believe that, and I start from that.
That's a really beautiful and interesting way. And of course, that also is difficult because in our society, we're sort of brought up to feel that we're not enough a lot of the time, that we need to achieve things and do things in order to be okay. And so to come at this from a place of saying, okay, the baseline is I'm okay and I shouldn't suffer. Well, that's the opposite of how a lot of us are brought up with life, which is like, you know what, you're not okay. You need to work on yourself. You need to do X, Y, Z, jump through all the hoops. And then by the time you die, possibly you're going to be okay, because it's such a different way of looking at things, this, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it changes everything. Changes everything. But that's not to say like there isn't like work to do to be a citizen of an enlightened society and to be kinder to other people. But that's why, you know, within the Paramitas, we also have things like being generous, being patient. And so that directs it a lot out to other people, because it's hard to just work on generosity and not you know, avoid interacting with other people and how you treat other people. And the same for patience. Like patience is actually working with your anger and reactivity. Generosity is working on your tendency to like cling to things and not want to let go and not want to share and you know, trying to make everything for yourself. That selfishness. So if you work with those things, then, you know, we are working on what might, you know, pop up in other self-improvement things, but we're working on it from a different sort of more self-charged way.
And do you think that, again, I don't want to compare, but I'm going to compare. Do you think it's Buddhism is more about the community and the group? Because just a few things that you've said, which is about the generosity for other people and for doing things for others and the community aspect of it. Is it more of a sort of other people focus and yoga focuses more on the self, or is that just not right?
It's hard to say because Buddhism isn't one thing.
Right.
And there are definitely paths of Buddhism where it's all about individual liberation, which, you know, you have to do some of before you can start thinking about other people.
Sure.
Like you have to do your own self-work. So it's important to do things that are a little bit more like looking inward and not looking outward.
Right.
But there are definite teachers and traditions within Buddhism that are focused on, as I said, this path of awakening an enlightened society. And there are definitely teachers such as Thich Nhat Hanh, who was a huge force. I mean, he's still is, but was a huge force in protesting the Vietnam War.
Yes.
And meeting with Martin Luther King and like doing, you know, incredible engaged work. And you can read his books about his activism, and it'll really break your heart open in the most beautiful way to hear from him. So like everything, some of it's very much directed inward, some of it's directed outward. So we can't just say it's one thing, but those are the teachings that most appeal to me, that take this path of individual liberation and then keep it going. Keep it going. Yeah, keep it on the road. So actually the Mahayana, one of the translation is it's like the great vehicle. So you know, we are on that road.
We're taking on the road. This is great. And I love it. This is touching people. Jada, yes, it flips everything. And that's true. It's like this whole different way of seeing things, to the way we've been taught to. And yeah, it's key, as he said, it's key to my journey as a parent. Yes.
Wow.
I think this is kind of our journeys for being, it's sort of, it's almost being a parent to ourselves. It's being that person who can be calming, soothing to ourselves as well as to others. Maybe it's like we can always be a parent.
Often I do, I think I've taught it in some of the classes on the site, is I do a compassion meditation, a Tumbling practice. And often, it's a practice where you take in the suffering of another person and then offer back kindness and compassion. So it's sort of the reverse of what you might normally do.
Yeah.
So you really take it in. And often I will do that practice for myself as a child.
Oh, yes.
And I recommend that to everyone. If you know, I may have even taught it on this before, but you just see yourself. You see yourself in front of you at a vulnerable time, a vulnerable age, a moment where you were suffering as a child, that at that point in time, you couldn't frame it, you couldn't understand it. And you know, maybe now you do, and you can parent that child version of yourself. You can offer compassion, and that can be profoundly healing.
Yeah, I've done that meditation, and it never fails to move me. It's really a beautiful and heart-opening
Yeah,
thing to do. And so now we're on the topic of meditation, Adam. I'd
sure.
like to sort of stick there because obviously that is also one of the paramitas. And, it's interesting to think about, because I know in the blog you were talking about yoga as a moving meditation, but not.
Yeah, because I think we can easily just throw that phrase out there
Yes.
that say that, okay, just because I'm doing something slow, I'm doing something like, I'm enjoying it, that I'm calling it a moving meditation.
Yeah.
And I don't really think that is it. I think that can be profoundly relaxing to move
Mhm.
slow and
Mhm.
and to do that,
Mhm.
especially if you're all the other times you're doing really quick vinyasa or other things. It can be nice to take a step back and do it slow.
Mhm.
But when I was creating the class on meditation,
Yeah.
um, I really wanted to help people find a sense of inner solitude and solitude on the mat, solitude in the best way. Because even when we're doing all of this work of being generous, of being patient, of turning outward, we still have to be able to take that time for ourselves to find pause, to find clarity. And it's so fundamental to all the Buddhist practice, all the teachings of yoga, and everything else is meditation.
Mm.
And I was thinking, all right, well, how do I actually do moving meditation when I practice? What do I need to do? And what is meditation, actually? Meditation, can be
Mm.
many things and many different techniques, but meditation is essentially, it's taught in sort of two stages,
Mhm.
which is shamatha, which is sometimes like called calm, abiding. But you could think of like very simplistically of thinking, I'm just learning to concentrate
Yes.
on something.
Yeah.
It might be breath, it might be on a gong, it might be on a mantra, it might be on something, but I'm learning to concentrate.
Mhm.
First stage, and then the second stage is vipassana, which is insight. So after I learn to concentrate, then I start having insights into the nature of reality and self and so on. So that's sort of the traditional path of meditation.
Yeah.
But me thinking, all right, well, we're doing asana, we're
Mhm.
doing postures, we're doing sun salutations.
Mhm.
How can I find that concentration, that insight, um, while doing like downward facing dog? So I wanted to work with focal points. So that was my process. I thought, all right, well, we're not just going to move slow. We're going to have focal points.
Mm.
And firstly, they will be
Mhm.
external from ourselves. So I will be doing down dog or sun salute or whatever shape. I will be looking at one fixed point.
Yeah.
It might be a dot on my floor. It might be a beautiful floral arrangement. It might be the photo or the painting in front of me. But I'm going to look at that thing
Mm.
every time I'm here, just as a practice of concentration,
Yeah.
of helping me tame my mind, because that's another way to look at meditation, that it's like mind training, mind taming
Yeah.
the restless mind. So I'm going to learn to concentrate. But I also didn't want to do something that was just so mental,
Yes.
because yoga postures is an embodied practice. So I also wanted to have an internal focal point.
Yeah.
So for the class that I recorded, the external focal point was, as I said, we're looking at one point. The internal focal point was mostly sort of deep core and breath.
Yeah.
So as I do all of these things, I'm going to pay attention to something internal, something external, sometimes separately, sometimes at the same time.
Yeah.
'Cause that process of learning to be in the world and in my body at the same time is what we're going to negotiate on the mat, but also everywhere else.
Yeah.
So that to me is what made moving a meditation out of something moving, is that I gotta pay attention.
Mm.
I'm not just like freestyling it. I
Mm.
am taming my mind to pay attention to something internal and external as I go. And you can really do that with any focal point, but those are the ones that I chose.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, no, and that's, it is so useful, because I think of it sort of again in the sort of two ways, that the mindfulness is the focus, the sort of more secular, right, I'm just going to tame my mind, and then the next step is, okay, now what am I going to do with that tame mind? Can I be a little bit more compassionate?
Yeah, you get insight. And you also have to remember, like, mindfulness training, you are being trained to be mindful of something. He's usually taught to be mindful of the breath.
Mm,
Sometimes it's mindful of thought or emotion,
mm,
or mindful of body. But
yeah,
you're not just, it's not just I'm mindful. No, you're the training, something is chosen to be mindful of
yeah,
as part of the meditation. I just wanted to bring that to the practice of postures. Not that I'm like
yeah.
the only person who done this, but I wanted to, for this course, to offer that.
Well, it's been really useful. I found it really useful. And Jada says as well, she loved the practice. The idea of the focal point helps maintain the sense of how to maintain focus inwards, no matter what's happening in the mind. And it's very moving. It ended up with joyful tears,
Great.
which is so beautiful. And yeah, thank you for sharing that, because I think it is something that's really quite special and heart opening when we're really present to our practice. And Emma, I'm just sending you so much love. Very, very old father died this morning. I'm finding having permission to be tender, to be myself, is very healing. So too is letting go and knowing all as it's meant to be.
Okay. So we can send love on to her.
Absolutely. Much love to you and to your father. Yes, and the Tonglen practice, did the Tonglen practice, and was very profound, seeing myself suffering and being the source of compassion. So it's interesting, isn't it? Because it is that being two people, seeing two things, having sort of being the watching mind as well as being the participant. And that's something I've never quite sort of understand about meditation, because you're sort of there watching yourself and you're thinking, well, who's that one then?
Yeah, like, yeah, who is the watcher?
Yeah, that's something that's it's always confused me so much. So yes, I like the Pauline. Thank you. It resonates with me, parenting myself as a child. Yeah, it really helped me so much. So I think these are practices which are very real. Like, there's a lot of people. I mean, all of us, as you say, are going through a sort of, all of us who aren't the enlightened ones are going through a constant state of suffering in some form or another, whether or not it's an anxiety over something very silly or over something that's really big, parent dying. There's a lot of people right now who are worried about jobs, who are worried about financial situation, who are worried about health of ourselves, of our relatives. There's so much which is worrying in the world. And I think it's just really beautiful that we can have some practices to keep us, to try to steady that storm of anxiety, which I know has flooded so many of us. And there was somebody on the movers group as well who said that one of your practices just, she's been suffering with anxiety for years, and it's really grounded her. And having that feeling of, I can focus, I can move just right now.
Yeah,
Is
I mean, just day by day. And, as I said before, like, when things are great, we're not going to do spiritual work.
Yeah,
We're not going to find, like, deepen our experience of life, because we're not being challenged. But when
yeah,
things are a little bit crummy, or, whatever this is our opportunity to dig a little bit deeper. And as I said before, like, there's so much people suffer,
mm,
big and small, grief, or, stubbing your toe and whatever it
mm,
is. That is part of life, but
mm,
there's a way out.
yeah,
I mean, that leap can be really hard to take when you're in it, to see that I am suffering, whatever it is I'm suffering with,
mm-hmm,
but to say to yourself, this doesn't have to be. Like, it's the pain or the grief like we can't avoid that. We can't avoid the hot and cold of life,
Yeah.
but we can work with how we experience it and perceive it and suffer or not from it. And I think we can find a way out if we believe that we deserve it. And that can be a hard step to take. But that's why, in the first class, I want everyone just to feel just the tenderness of their heart.
Yes.
I put that in because a couple years ago, I had to have a medical test where they imaged my heart. And I was sitting there, and something like totally ordinary for the tech person there and the nurse, see my heart thumpa thumpa. I just looked at it and thought, wow, that is me. That is my life. But it's actually what everybody has, this sort of tenderness and vulnerability. Like we all have this, and we all can find a way out. And often it helps if we try to do it together.
Absolutely. I think it's really beautiful being joined in a community of people who are going through whatever we're going through. And we are looking at transcending it and how we can uncover what the deep layers of truth might be. And Emma, I'm glad that this is helpful, finding a practice on another level to the sadness that transcends it all and gives perspective. I suppose that's what it is. It's a perspective finding, which gives us the freedom. You've summed it up there. Yeah, Adam, I'm just so grateful to you for the thought, the mindfulness, the intentions, the sharing, and the giving that you're giving to me. I mean, I'm very grateful to be in this position, to be able to have these practices and be able to talk with you. It's just amazing. And being able to join with other like-minded souls who are on this path. And we know that the suffering is optional.
It is. And it's my joy and my pleasure to share these. But do know that this is coming from my practice because I'm living it too. That I'm not a perfect person by any means. I'm still working on all of these, and that, so we just keep that attitude that we're gonna do our best to work on these. So that's what the discipline practice is all about, is that we just take the middle road. We do what we can do on a daily basis. We find whatever enthusiasm we can. We try to keep the reminder that, okay, I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. I'm a good person. I deserve this. And that's going to help fuel us. And we just we do the work. We do the work. We do the work day by day. And it's an ongoing practice. But I believe in it, and I hope you find your path as well.
Well, thank you. I really, really appreciate your time and everything you've given to me and to the community. And thank you guys very, very much for joining, for sharing, for being so vulnerable and open and honest. It's been inspiring being with you guys as well. And if you have any other questions, just continue commenting and we'll be taking a peek. So
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kat.
All right. With much love to you all. Take care, Adam.
Bye.